PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Kelly. And on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub, we're going to do something a bit different on this channel. As instead of talking about the Vegas Golden Knights, instead of talking about, the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Vegas Golden Knights, what's going on, first round of the playoffs, Dallas Stars, Vegas Golden Knights, we're going to do something a tad bit different on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub, as your host, Ian Kelly, is actually going to be looking at a different team in the Western Conference, and that is the team that won the Pacific Division in the Vancouver Canucks. And more importantly, this is going to be a two-part question. This is the reason why I'm making this video. A, how did the Vancouver Canucks build the winning culture they have now? How did the Vancouver Canucks find a way to go from being a team that was rebuilding, a team that had top 5, top 10 picks in the NHL draft just a while ago, to having the best record in the Pacific Division? How did the Vancouver Canucks go from a team that was just floundering towards the middle to now having the best record in the Pacific, having won the top seeds in all of the Western Conference, and taking on the Nashville Predators in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2024? So that's the first part question, how they built their winning culture. And then a second question is going to be, could they do it? Could the Vancouver Canucks organization win a Stanley Cup? While you have your core players, while you have your head coach, while you have your general manager, can the Vancouver Canucks win a Stanley Cup? Are they in their window? Can it be done? So that's going to be the two-part question we are going to be answering on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub. We're pivoting away from the Golden Knights for just a little bit, and we're going to talk about the Vancouver Canucks on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub. Now, if you haven't given it a chance, go to www.prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. Check out all the content we have on the network. I put this up here just so you can see all the social medias. And then we also have our social media as well at Vegas Hockey Hub. So if you want to go to our YouTube channel, our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter, our TikTok, we are everywhere at Vegas Hockey Hub. And if you want to follow your host, I am also on all social media platforms, and I have the same handle at Ian J. Kelly. So how the Vancouver Canucks built a winning culture, how it was done, is actually a 4-part process, okay? It involves a bunch of steps that ended up becoming one whole team, okay? Now, the first reason that we're going to do, okay, reason number 1 for why the Vancouver Canucks have built a winning culture, okay, the number 1 reason why the Vancouver Canucks have arguably one of the best records in all of the Western Conference is the Vancouver Canucks built their core. They drafted. They were homegrown. They were a team where all 4 of their core members, we'll talk about all 4 of them, they came from the Vancouver Canucks organization. The team walked up to the podium and announced their pick, as those 4 guys were all made in Vancouver. Now, I'm going to take you back just a little bit, okay? In 2014, the Vancouver Canucks, this was a team a couple of years removed from losing to the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals. And during the 2014 NHL draft, they would make a huge step in the right direction, and they would draft the first player of their core. And I'm talking about in the second round, they would draft their goaltender in Thatcher Demko. Now, Thatcher Demko, this is a guy who came from NCAA. He played college hockey here, okay? And this was someone in Thatcher Demko. He's sitting there. He gets drafted by the Vancouver Canucks organization. Oh, and by the way, for anybody who's curious, the person they drafted, the person they drafted around them, funny enough, is a current Vegas Golden Knight in Ivan Barbashev. So a little bit of tie-in to the Vegas Golden Knights there. But Thatcher Demko came from Boston College, played NCAA hockey, and was drafted by the Vancouver Canucks in the second round. Now, it took a couple of years for Thatcher Demko to eventually earn his spot in the NHL. But then by 2019, by 2020, he becomes the staple. He becomes an everyday starting goaltender in the NHL. And he helps the Vancouver Canucks make it to the playoffs in 2020. And by the way, because we're the Vegas Golden Knights and Vegas Hockey Hub, I vividly remember how Thatcher Demko and the Vancouver Canucks pushed the Vegas Golden Knights to a very rough series in 2020, okay? In the second round, after the Golden Knights beat the Chicago Blackhawks in the first round, they would take on the Vancouver Canucks in round 2, and they went 7 games in the second round. And I remember Thatcher Demko was a big part of that. Thatcher Demko actually had really a coming out party in the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs, as he had a goals against average of 0.64 and a save percentage of 98.5 for the Vancouver Canucks in the 2020 playoffs. And over the last couple of years, he has slowly but surely become a superstar in Vancouver. He has become a household name out there. And over the last couple of years, and I'm using Hockey Reference as my data, okay? HockeyReference.com, that's what I'm using here. Thatcher Demko went from being an all-star goaltender with the Vancouver Canucks to receiving Vezina Trophy votes. And this season, 2023-2024, he has been a top 3 goaltender in the NHL, okay? If anyone wants to sit here and argue that, for example, if you want to say Connor Hellebuck, he'll be up there. Sergei Bobrovsky out there in Florida, they're doing a fantastic job. Igor Shesterkin out with the New York Rangers. But you have to admit that Thatcher Demko this season has been incredible for the Vancouver Canucks organization. And like I mentioned, him being an all-star, okay, and him being in not one but 2 different all-star games, I have to give a lot of credit to Thatcher Demko because he was the first member of their core that they drafted. And, when you really study Thatcher Demko, he went from somebody who, you got to remember the goaltenders the Vancouver Canucks have had over the last decade. You had the Roberto Luongos, you had the Ryan Millers, you had the Corey Schneiders, the Jacob Markstroms. To finally get a goaltender in Thatcher Demko, who confidently, I can say, has become a staple. He has become a pillar now of the Vancouver Canucks organization. And even when he is not in net, you have a backup goaltender in Casey DeSmith. You had Arturs Silovs, who I actually watched the Vancouver Canucks and Vegas Golden Knights play on April 8th. And Silovs was actually in net that night and won the game against the Vegas Golden Knights. That was back on April 8th. But the goaltending with the Vegas Golden Knights organization is the biggest key for why they've built a winning culture. Thatcher Demko being drafted in 2014 has become the everyday goaltender that they are counting on. And him playing game 1 against the Nashville Predators in the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs, you see everything going on there. So he was the first one, okay? The first player from that core the Vancouver Canucks drafted was Thatcher Demko, their goaltender, in 2014. The next year, 2015, they draft their second member of that core in Brock Besser, okay? This is a guy in Brock Besser who, when they drafted him in the first round, he wasn't a, he wasn't a top 10 pick. He wasn't a top 15 pick. No, he was drafted 23rd overall in the 2015 NHL entry draft. And since for Vegas Hockey Hub, I do want to quickly mention this, by the way. There's been some picks that were around him during that 2015 NHL draft. But if you can find someone that was better than Brock Besser at that pick, I mean, Anthony Beauvillier, he's someone that you could say maybe. You have your Joel Eriksson-Ek. You have guys, for example, like Thomas Chabot. There were some good picks that were there during the 2015 draft. the draft that Jack Eichel was a part of. But overall, Brock Besser has turned into a quality player for the Vancouver Canucks, and they drafted him. He was the second member of that core the Vancouver Canucks drafted. And over the last couple of years for Brock Besser, he has actually turned into a 70-point player this past season. This is a guy in Brock Besser who hit the 40-goal mark for the first time in his career. And I have to mention, he is not even 27 years old at this point. So when it comes to Brock Besser, I sit here and look at him and go, okay, you are in your 20s. You're still, came from 2015. You're a part of that team. Thatcher Demko, he is about 28 years old, the goaltender they drafted in 2014. And then in 2017, they drafted the third member of their core, someone who has been a electrified goal scorer for them. And of course, I'm talking about Elias Pettersson. And Elias Pettersson, this is someone who ever since he got drafted by the Vancouver Canucks with the 5th overall pick in the 2017 draft, which, by the way, I'm going to pivot real quick because we're Vegas Hockey Hub. The very next pick after Elias Pettersson was Cody Glass with the Vegas Golden Knights. So, yeah, the Vegas Golden Knights were this close to drafting Elias Pettersson, someone who throughout his career now has scored over 170 goals in his career. This is someone in Elias Pettersson who not only won the Calder Trophy when he was Rookie of the Year, but he has received Lady Byng votes 4 separate times. He has been, part of the consideration for the Selke Trophy in at least one, if not 2 times. It's also the same Elias Pettersson that scored 89 points this year after coming off a 100-point season. So to say he has become a superstar and the face of the franchise in the Vancouver Canucks organization would be an understatement, considering he is a 4-time All-Star out there in Vancouver. But like I mentioned, they drafted him. All right, how the Vancouver Canucks are building a winning culture is by drafting their core. Okay, you drafted Demko in 2014. You drafted Besser in 2015. You drafted Pettersson in 2017. And then 2018, you drafted the best defenseman in all of hockey. And I'm not going to sit here and try to debate with anybody about this. If you do not have Quinn Hughes as your best defenseman, you're crazy. Okay? I'm saying this as a biased Vegas Golden Knights fan that Quinn Hughes is right now the best defenseman in hockey. Just looking at his statistics over this past season, the 25-year-old Quinn Hughes. This past season, he had 75 assists for 92 points. Keep in mind, 92 points for a defenseman, okay? For a defenseman to have 92 points in the modern era. It's also the same Quinn Hughes that had a plus-minus of plus 38, and he racked up around 40 penalty minutes this past season with the Vancouver Canucks. To say that he winning a Norris Trophy would be an understatement. I mean, him winning the Norris Trophy after receiving votes the past 2 seasons, Quinn Hughes has become the best defenseman in the NHL. And, like I said, I know some people are going to try to sit there. They're going to try to make arguments for it, and I get it. But overall, when you look at what the defensemen have been doing as of late, I mean, Roman Josi, Cale Makar, Adam Fox, I know he won the award about 2 or 3 years ago, but, those are some good defensemen. But this season, Quinn Hughes was the best defenseman, and he came from Vancouver. And he was the 4th and final player that they drafted. He was a 7th overall pick during the 2018 NHL draft. And by the way, there is no connection with the Vegas Golden Knights because they didn't even have a draft pick in the first round of the 2018 NHL draft. So that's the first part of how the Vancouver Canucks built a winning culture, is that in the span of 5 seasons, they drafted their 4 core members. they did the opposite of what our Vegas Golden Knights have done. The Vegas Golden Knights didn't draft their core. They went out and they acquired their core. The Vancouver Canucks built their core from the bottom up. So that's the first reason of how they built the winning culture. The second way was establishing a culture, okay? Now, for the people who do not know about the general manager out there with the Vancouver Canucks, his name is Patrick Allvin. And, when it comes to him, when it comes to Patrick Allvin, this is a general manager who, when you study what he has done with the Vancouver Canucks organization, when you see that 2 years ago, he took a Vancouver Canucks organization that really only had a few bright spots on it, okay? And fast forward it 2 seasons from now, what he has done with that team is remarkable. To go from an organization that struggled and barely was outside the playoffs, okay? To go from the head coaching fiasco, which was Travis Green getting fired, and then bringing in Barbecue Bruce to turn around the organization and bring him back after being the interim head coach after replacing Travis Green. You have to remember, this is the Vancouver Canucks team that had just missed the playoffs that prior year. So you have Patrick Allvin, and what does he do as a general manager? He establishes a winning culture. He brings in the right pieces. And really the main person you have to thank for that is the fact that you had a guy with the Vancouver Canucks organization that after they started out 18-25-3, he fires head coach Bruce Boudreau, who did a relatively solid job in that full year that he did with the Vancouver Canucks. But he took that culture and he turned it around. And how he turned it around was with this third part, okay? How Patrick Allvin established the culture was by finding the right head coach. And what he did was that in January of 2023, after letting go of Bruce Boudreau, he called up ex-Arizona Coyotes head coach Rick Tocchet and made him the head coach. He announces that Rick Tocchet would be the next head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. And in those final 36 games that he was the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks in 2022, 2023, he would go 20-12-4 in his final half of the season in 2022, 2023. And then this season, in 2023, 2024, Rick Tocchet would have a 50-win season, okay? His current win-loss record as the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks is 70 wins, 35 losses, and 13 overtime losses. But just think about that. Finding the right head coach, finding someone in Rick Tocchet and his mentality as a head coach, he has won 70 games in a year and a half as a head coach in Vancouver. Finding someone like Rick Tocchet, who had led the Arizona Coyotes to a playoff appearance in 2020, they lost in the first round, but still leading the Arizona Coyotes to their last playoff appearance in 2020. You'd actually have to sit here and applaud Rick Tocchet because he has actually become one of the best coaches in the NHL today. And it's actually quite commendable considering what the roster became this season. This is a Vancouver Canucks roster that had one player over 100 points. They had 4 players over 70 points in this season. It's also the same Vancouver Canucks organization that when it came to health, they had 7 players play 80 or more games this season in Vancouver. And in terms of spreading around the puck, Rick Tocchet's system produced 5 20-goal scorers. It's also the same Rick Tocchet that had at least 9 players have 20 assists or more this season with the Vancouver Canucks. And as a little cherry on top, he had 12 players have 25 points or more this season in Vancouver. And because Rick Tocchet is a very physical guy, I also have to mention this as well. At least half a dozen players on the Vancouver Canucks had over 50 penalty minutes this season with the Vancouver Canucks. So overall, when you sit here and study the mentality and the philosophy that the culture was brought in by Patrik Allvin, and then you had Rick Tocchet, who got brought in a year later, it makes a lot of sense how the Vancouver Canucks have built a winning culture, okay? You really start to understand how establishing a culture in 2022 with bringing in Patrik Allvin and then finding the right coach with Rick Tocchet, you really see the Vancouver Canucks for what they have become, and that is the best record in the Western Conference, okay? You are establishing a fact that this is a Vancouver Canucks team that has a solidified goaltender and a Vezina Trophy player in Thatcher Demko. You're seeing a guy who is arguably the best defenseman in the NHL in a Norris Trophy nominee in Quinn Hughes. And then you have a bunch of forwards who can pass the puck around and shoot, and the two that came from their core in Brock Besser and Elias Pettersson. So, overall, what's the last two? Because I said that there's 5 reasons how the Vancouver Canucks built a winning culture, all right? Reason 1 was drafting their core. Reason 2 was establishing a culture with their general manager and Patrik Allvin. And reason 3 was finding the right head coach in Rick Tocchet. But what was reason 4, okay? What is the 4th reason for the Vancouver Canucks' success? What is the next reason for why the Vancouver Canucks have built a 50-win season in this past season? Well, reason number 4 was getting the right players via free agency, okay? I also want everyone to think about this and really connect to it, okay? This is a Vancouver Canucks squad that made some really solid moves in terms of free agency. Now, this guy played for the Vegas Golden Knights, so he's the first one to pop up in my head. But the first player they acquired via free agency that has actually turned out to be a great bottom 6 player for the Vancouver Canucks is former Vegas Golden Knight and Stanley Cup champion Teddy Blueger. Teddy Blueger went from raising the Stanley Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights, getting paid by the Vancouver Canucks, and this past season putting up 28 points as a bottom 6 forward for the Vancouver Canucks. This is someone in Teddy Blueger who went from only having 10 points in his last season in Pittsburgh to having 28 points in Vancouver. This is someone in Teddy Blueger who only had 2 goals with the Vegas Golden Knights to getting triple that and having 6 goals in a single season in Vancouver. So Teddy Blueger was a solid free agent acquisition for Vancouver, okay? You also have to remember they have brought in defensemen like Ian Cole. And Ian Cole, coming over from the Tampa Bay Lightning, someone who won someone who's been there, someone who's won Stanley Cups out there at the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's been an established veteran at this point in the NHL. Well, he comes over to Vancouver. He becomes one of their defensive pairings and puts up a solid season in Vancouver, having 11 points, a +10, and 61 penalty minutes in 78 games with the Vancouver Canucks. Once again, using Hockey Reference as my data for the statistics there. And then you also had the acquisitions of Connor Garland, okay? Connor Garland was with the Arizona Coyotes. He actually played in the system with Rick Tocchet out there, and then they trade him from the Arizona Coyotes to the Vancouver Canucks. They traded him for Oliver Ekman-Larsson. They go over to Vancouver, and they trade him alongside Oliver Ekman-Larsson. He goes over to Vancouver, and he became arguably one of the best defensive forwards in the NHL. There's someone in Connor Garland who just achieved a 20-goal season and racked up a little over 45 points this season with the Vancouver Canucks organization. There's someone in Connor Garland who, ever since being acquired and playing in Vancouver, has had 3 seasons in a row of 45 points or more in Vancouver. So overall, Connor Garland was another example of a great offseason, going in, acquiring him, trading him from Arizona to Vancouver, and playing in the same situation as Rick Tocchet. Now, you also had Philippe Horniak, and then you had him at defense, who they acquired from the Detroit Red Wings. He was a former, second-round pick by Detroit. He goes over to Vancouver and put up 48 points this season with the Vancouver Canucks, and has become arguably one of their best defensemen in the organization. And then lastly, I have to mention this guy, because if I didn't, there would be an uproar, and that is arguably their best player, and that is JT Miller. Now, JT Miller was traded to the Vancouver Canucks back in 2019. He was with the Tampa Bay Lightning. They traded him before they had their run with the Stanley Cup. But over the last couple of seasons, JT Miller went from somebody barely having 45 points with Tampa Bay to now having 5 seasons in a row of having, 45 points or more. He's also had 3 seasons of 70 points or more. And this past season, JT Miller had 37 goals, 66 assists, and a whopping 103 points with the Vancouver Canucks. So JT Miller has become arguably the best player they acquired via, the offseason, going out, getting players, acquiring players through trades and through the offseason via free agency. But JT Miller is their biggest contribution to that. So that's reason number 4. Okay, getting the right players to fit in that system. And then the 5th and final reason is having a reason to win. Okay, this is a Vancouver Canucks squad who, like I mentioned a little bit before, this is a Vancouver Canucks situation where they had back-to-back seasons of them not making the playoffs, being just this close, but missing the playoffs. They did that 3 years in a row. And when you've missed the playoffs by this much in back-to-back years, you get hungry, okay? You are dying to make the playoffs. And when all the chemistry comes together and you gel well with the Vancouver Canucks, you get what happened this year, okay? So there's the 5 reasons for why the Vancouver Canucks built a winning culture. Reason 1, drafting their core of Thatcher Demko, Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson, and Quinn Hughes. Reason 2, establishing a culture, finding the right general manager and Patrick Allvin. Reason 3, finding the right head coach by bringing over Rick Tocchet from the Arizona Coyotes. Reason 4, getting players via free agency. Going into an offseason and trading for players like JT Miller, trading for players like Connor Garland, going in and getting players from free agency like a Teddy Bluger from the Vegas Golden Knights. And then reason 5 was, after missing the playoffs 3 years in a row, they had a reason to win. They had a desire to make the playoffs, and they did. And the first round, Nashville Predators, that interesting series there. So, to kind of conclude this, could the Vancouver Canucks win a Stanley Cup? Possibly. All right. Within this core, I will say within the next 4 or 5 years, I would not be surprised if the Vancouver Canucks hoisted their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. I will not be stunned if by 2028, the Vancouver Canucks, with their core, with Rick Tocchet and with Patrick Allvin, find a way to win a Stanley Cup. Now, this is Vegas Hockey Hub. I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. Thank you for watching this video. And until next time, continue watching hockey, go support junior hockey, and go hockey, go.